My mother didn't raise her voice when she said it. She didn't need to. "You'd never win in court," she said calmly, folding her arms as if the conversation were already over. Judges don't side with daughters who sue their own mothers. We were sitting in her living room, the same one where I'd done homework at the coffee table, the same one where she taught me that loyalty mattered more than fairness. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, striping her face in shadows that made her look older than I remembered. Confident, certain, finished with me. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap, feeling the familiar pull to back down, to apologize for causing discomfort, to make peace at my own expense. That reflex had kept me quiet for years. But this time, something was different, because my phone, silent in my pocket, already held the court docket number, and she didn't know what I had already done. "You're emotional," she continued, shaking her head gently. "That's why this feels bigger to you than it is." Emotional. She'd always used that word like a closing argument. I looked at the family photos on the wall behind her. Smiling faces, carefully framed moments that never showed what happened just outside the picture. "I'm not emotional," I said quietly. "I'm prepared." She laughed, soft, almost affectionate. "You think preparation beats experience?" she asked. "I've been around lawyers longer than you've been alive." I nodded once. "That's why I hire my own." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "Still," she waved it off. "Court favors credibility," she said. "And I have it. Credibility." The word lingered between us. She had always believed credibility came from confidence, from speaking first, from telling the same story long enough that people stopped questioning it. For years, that story had painted me as the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the daughter who didn't understand sacrifice. What she never expected was documentation. I stood, smoothing my jacket. "We'll see," I said. She watched me head for the door, head tilted with something close to pity. "I'm trying to save you from humiliation," she said. "When the judge dismisses this, don't say I didn't warn you." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "They didn't know what I had already done," I said softly. She frowned. "What does that mean?" But I was already walking out. The courtroom didn't feel dramatic when I first stepped into it. It felt procedural, neutral, almost indifferent. Wood benches, a seal on the wall, people flipping through papers instead of staring at each other. This wasn't a place for performance. That was important. My attorney whispered something reassuring beside me, but I barely heard it. My eyes were on my mother across the aisle, sitting straight-backed, perfectly composed. She didn't look worried. She looked entertained, as if this were a lesson she was about to teach me in public. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The clerk announced the case number. My name versus hers. Hearing it out loud sent a quiet shock through my chest. Not fear, but recognition. This was real. My mother glanced at me, lips curling into a knowing smile. She leaned over just enough for me to hear. "You still have time to withdraw," she murmured. "I'd hate to watch you lose." I met her eyes. "I already won," I said. She scoffed softly. Delusion doesn't play well in court. The judge began reviewing motions, flipping through the file with careful precision. No reaction, no commentary, just reading. Minutes stretched. My mother's confidence stayed intact until the judge paused. Actually paused. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing slightly at the screen in front of her. "What is this filing?" she asked, scrolling. My attorney stood. "That would be the supplemental evidence submission, Your Honor." My mother stiffened. "What supplemental filing?" she asked sharply. The judge didn't look at her. "The one entered into the record 3 weeks ago," she replied. "Stamped. Verified." My mother turned to her lawyer, confusion flashing across her face. He didn't meet her eyes. And in that moment, just a crack, barely visible, I saw it. The first fracture. Because whatever my mother thought this case was about, the court was already reading something she had never seen coming. My mother leaned toward her lawyer, whispering urgently. "What is she talking about?" I heard her hiss. "You said there was nothing else." He shifted in his seat, eyes fixed on the judge's bench. He didn't answer her right away. That silence was louder than anything he could have said. The judge continued scrolling, her expression unreadable. "This supplemental filing includes bank records, contractual correspondence, and a notarized affidavit," she said, all dated prior to the initiation of this suit. My mother's posture stiffened. That's impossible, she said out loud, forgetting where she was. The judge looked up. Ms. Carter, you'll direct all comments through counsel. My mother pressed her lips together, jaw tightening. I sat still, hands folded, heart steady. I had imagined this moment so many times in my head that now, living inside it, felt almost quiet. 3 months earlier, I had been sitting alone in my car outside a public records office, staring at a manila envelope like it might explode. Inside were documents I'd spent weeks tracking down, corporate filings, old contracts, correspondence with signatures I recognized immediately.
My mother's. What I didn't realize then was how casually she'd assumed no one would ever look backward. People who rewrite history rely on one thing: no one checking the past. The judge tapped her pen against the desk. "Counsel," she said, addressing my mother's attorney, "your response notes state there was no written agreement between the parties." The attorney cleared his throat. "That was our understanding at the time, Your Honor." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Then perhaps you should review Exhibit C." My attorney stood smoothly, clicking a remote. The screen behind the bench lit up. A scanned document appeared. My mother's signature sat at the bottom. Clear. Undeniable. The room shifted. My mother sucked in a sharp breath. "That's out of context," she blurted. The judge didn't look at her. "This appears to be a profit-sharing agreement," the judge said, with clear language outlining fiduciary responsibility. My mother shook her head, almost laughing. "That was informal. Family." The word family echoed in the courtroom like a shield she expected to work. My attorney spoke calmly. "The law doesn't distinguish obligations by blood, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Correct." My mother's lawyer finally leaned toward her. "You didn't tell me about this," he whispered. She stared straight ahead, face flushing. "I didn't think it mattered," she muttered. I felt something twist in my chest. Not satisfaction, not anger. Recognition. This was the pattern. She decided what mattered. Everyone else lived with the consequences. The judge continued reviewing. "There's also an account transfer here," she said, scrolling. "Funds diverted after the agreement was signed." My mother's composure cracked. "You're making this sound intentional," she said sharply. The judge looked directly at her now. "That's because it was structured," she replied. "Intention is inferred from pattern." The courtroom was silent. I felt my mother's eyes on me, sharp, accusing, almost pleading. She had believed this case would hinge on emotion, on perception, on the idea that a daughter challenging her mother would look ungrateful by default. What she hadn't planned for was paperwork. Cold. Boring. Unarguable paperwork. The judge closed the file slowly. "We'll proceed," she said. My mother leaned back in her chair, suddenly very still. And for the first time since this began, she wasn't smiling. Because whatever she'd been telling herself about court, it was no longer matching what she was seeing on the screen. And the truth, once entered into the record, was starting to scroll faster than she could keep up with. The judge called a brief recess. 10 minutes. That was all it took for the room to fracture. My mother stood the moment the gavel struck, pulling her lawyer aside with a grip so tight her knuckles went white. "You said this would go away," she hissed. "You said she had nothing." He rubbed his temples. "You didn't disclose this agreement," he said quietly. "Or the transfers." "I didn't think they'd find them," she snapped. "Find them." The word hung in the air like a confession she didn't realize she'd made. I stayed seated. I'd learned long ago that when someone panics, the worst thing you can do is interrupt them. Across the aisle, my attorney leaned toward me. "She's unraveling," she murmured. "Let her." The judge returned, and the courtroom snapped back to attention. "Ms. Carter," she said, addressing my mother, "I have a question regarding your testimony." My mother straightened, composure sliding back into place like muscle memory. "Yes, Your Honor." You stated earlier that your daughter had no reasonable expectation of compensation. Yes, she replied smoothly. This was family. We helped each other. The judge nodded slowly. Then why does this agreement reference monthly distributions? The question landed hard. My mother blinked. The judge continued. And why does it specify penalties for non-compliance? My mother glanced at her lawyer. He didn't help her. That language was boilerplate, she said finally. We never intended to enforce it. The judge tilted her head. Intent doesn't negate obligation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My mother's voice sharpened. You're twisting this. No, the judge replied calmly. I'm reading it. The difference mattered. The judge turned to my attorney. Please summarize the pattern you allege. My attorney stood, steady and clear. For 5 years, the defendant represented the plaintiff's work as communal, she said, while privately profiting from it. When challenged, she dismissed the plaintiff's rights as unenforceable due to family relationship. She paused. The record contradicts that. The judge nodded. Ms. Carter, she said, turning back to my mother, do you deny receiving these funds? My mother's mouth opened. Closed. No, she said. And do you deny failing to distribute them as agreed? She swallowed. No. The silence that followed felt heavy. Final. My mother turned toward me then, eyes wide with something I hadn't seen before. Fear. You never told me you were going to do this, she whispered. I met her gaze. You told me I'd never win, I replied. I listened. The judge cleared her throat. We'll proceed to closing, she said. My mother slumped back in her chair, confidence gone, hands shaking as she clasped them together. This wasn't a battle of personalities anymore. It was arithmetic. And numbers don't care who raised you. As the attorneys prepared, I felt the weight of years shift off my shoulders. Not because it was over, but because the truth had finally stopped needing my voice to survive. It was standing on its own now. And my mother knew it. The judge didn't rule that day. She closed her folder, thanked both sides, and said the words my mother had never planned for. I'll take this under advisement. Advisement. It sounded harmless. Administrative. Almost gentle. But it meant everything was out of our hands now. Outside the courtroom, the hallway buzzed with low voices and shuffling papers. Reporters lingered near the elevators, sensing blood in the water. My mother avoided them instinctively, head down, gripping her purse like it was the last solid thing she owned. She stopped me near the exit. You didn't have to do all this, she said, voice tight. Dragging it out. Making people look. I studied her face, the familiar lines, the practiced composure cracking at the edges. I didn't drag it out, I said. I brought it into the light. She scoffed. You always liked drama. I shook my head. I like closure. She looked away, jaw clenched. 4 weeks after that, nothing happened. No calls from the court. No updates. Just silence. That was the hardest part. Every morning, I checked the docket. Every evening, I forced myself to stop. Life continued around the case in an almost mocking way. Meetings, groceries, small talk that felt absurd when a verdict hovered over everything. My mother filled the silence differently. She called relatives, friends, anyone who would listen. I heard the fragments through the family grapevine. She's being influenced. She's bitter. This isn't how a family behaves. The old narrative, polished and reused. But something had changed. People didn't repeat it back with the same certainty. Because once court records exist, opinions get quieter. One afternoon, my attorney called. The judge requested additional briefing, she said. That's usually not bad. Usually. My stomach tightened anyway. What does she want? I asked. Clarification on damages, she replied. And enforcement. Enforcement. That word stayed with me. It meant the judge wasn't asking if there had been harm. She was asking how much. I thought of my mother then, not as an opponent, not even as a villain, but as someone who had lived a long time believing authority was something you claimed, not something you proved. That belief was about to meet a system that didn't care how convincingly you spoke. A week later, the notice came. Verdict to be issued electronically. No courtroom. No speeches. No last-minute appeals to emotion. Just a screen. My mother called me that night. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Whatever happens, she said, remember I'm still your mother. I closed my eyes. And I'm still your daughter, I replied. That didn't protect me before. She inhaled sharply. You don't know what this will do to me, she whispered. I thought about the years I'd lived under the weight of her certainty. Of being told what I deserved, what I could ask for, what I would never win. I know exactly what it will do, I said. Because it already did it to me. She didn't answer. The call ended without goodbye. The next morning, I sat at my desk, laptop open, refreshing the court portal every few minutes. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, like something was finally about to give way. Somewhere across town, my mother was doing the same thing. She still believed, deep down, that courts sided with authority, with confidence, with parents. She still believed I'd lose. And in a few minutes, a line of text would appear on a screen that would prove which one of us understood the system better. The page didn't change at first. I clicked refresh again. And again. Nothing. Just the same sterile docket layout, the same case number staring back at me like it had all the time in the world. My phone buzzed once. Then stopped. I ignored it. This moment didn't belong to anyone else. At 10:47 a.m., the screen blinked. A new line appeared. Order and judgment. Filed. My breath caught. Not sharply, not dramatically, but deep, like my body had been waiting for permission to inhale. I clicked. The document loaded slowly, page by page, each second stretching longer than the months that had led here. I didn't scroll right away. I let my eyes find the header first. The court seal. The judge's name. Real. Final. Then I read. Not skimming. Not hunting for a single word. I read every sentence like it might disappear if I rushed. Findings of fact. The court acknowledged the agreement. The transfers. The reliance. The imbalance of power. Each paragraph felt like a quiet correction, not just of events, but of the story I'd been told my entire life. Then I reached the section titled Conclusion of Law. My hands tightened on the mouse. The plaintiff prevails. I didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't cry. I just sat there, staring at the words as if they might rearrange themselves out of spite. They didn't. The judgment continued. Damages awarded. Restitution ordered. Costs assessed. Enforceable. Final. My phone buzzed again, this time insistently. Mom. I didn't answer. Not yet. Because somewhere on another screen, those same words were scrolling into her life. The same way they had into mine. Without ceremony. Without negotiation. Without regard for how sure she'd sounded on that couch months ago. I imagined her sitting very still. Reading. Rereading. Looking for an angle. A loophole. A sentence that softened the blow. There wasn't one. The law didn't speak in maternal tones. It didn't care who raised whom. It only cared who could prove what. My attorney called. You won, she said simply. I know, I replied. You okay? I thought about that. About how strange it felt to be right after being told for so long that I wouldn't be. Yes, I said. I am. The phone rang again. Mom. I let it ring this time. Not out of cruelty. Out of necessity. Because the verdict didn't need commentary. It had already said everything that needed to be said. But I knew she wouldn't stop calling. Not yet. Because for the first time in her life, certainty had failed her. And she was about to find out what that feels like. My mother didn't leave a voicemail. That was how I knew she'd read it. She texted instead, 3 short messages, sent minutes apart. We need to talk. This isn't what I expected. Please. Please. She hadn't used that word with me in years. I set my phone face down and stood, pacing my apartment slowly, deliberately, letting the moment settle without rushing to fill it. The verdict had landed. Nothing I said now could change it. That was the point. An hour later, my attorney forwarded me a notice. Enforcement proceedings scheduled. Automatic. Procedural. Relentless. The court didn't pause for feelings. My mother finally called again that evening. I answered this time. She didn't say hello. They ruled in your favor, she said, voice flat, like she was repeating something she still didn't believe. Yes, I replied. A pause. I don't understand how this happened, she said. Judges don't usually side with daughters. I finished. She inhaled sharply. That's not what I meant. It is, I said gently. It's just not how you'd phrase it. Silence stretched. They're ordering me to pay you, she said finally. To return money. Yes. And they'll make it public, she added, voice cracking. People will think I took advantage of you. I closed my eyes. They'll think you lost a case, I said. That's all. She laughed weakly. You always minimize things when it suits you. No, I said. I'm finally being precise. Her breathing sounded uneven now. I did so much for you, she whispered. I don't deserve this. I felt the old tug then, the urge to soothe, to reassure, to absorb her distress. I didn't. This isn't punishment, I said. It's correction. She didn't respond. After a moment she said quietly, I never thought you'd go through with it. I thought about that. About how many times she'd relied on my hesitation. My loyalty. My fear of being the bad one. I didn't either, I admitted. Until I realized not going through with it was costing me more. Her voice dropped. So what happens now? I considered the question. Now, I said, the court enforces its order. And we figure out what kind of relationship is possible after truth. She exhaled shakily. I feel like I lost you, she said. I looked out the window, watching the city lights come on one by one. You lost control, I replied. I gained myself. She didn't argue. That might have been the hardest part. After we hung up, I sat alone with the verdict document open on my laptop. Not to relive it, but to absorb what it meant. The law hadn't chosen me because I was a daughter. It had chosen the evidence. And for the first time, that felt like justice instead of rejection. But there was still one thing left. One final shift. And it had nothing to do with courts. The money arrived 2 weeks later. Not all at once. In carefully labeled transfers, monitored by the court, stripped of drama. Each deposit came with a reference number and a reminder that this wasn't a gift. It was restitution. I didn't celebrate. I paid off the debts I'd carried quietly for years. The ones that came from trusting instead of verifying. From staying small to keep peace. When the last balance hit 0, I sat back and felt something unfamiliar. Light. My mother stopped calling after that. Not out of anger. Out of recalibration. People who live on certainty don't know what to do when it's taken from them. At a family gathering months later, someone pulled me aside and whispered, "Was it really as bad as they say?" I smiled politely. "It was documented," I said. That ended the conversation. My mother and I exist now in a careful distance. Not estranged. Not close. Honest. She once told me I'd never win in court. She was wrong. But the real victory wasn't the verdict scrolling across a screen. It was sitting in that courtroom, watching authority collapse under evidence, and realizing I no longer needed her belief to validate my reality. The law didn't choose sides. It chose facts. And for the first time, that worked in my favor. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.